On a cold afternoon in March 2013, a hiker made his way through the rugged brush surrounding Lake J.B. in West Texas. It wasn't a place many people visited. The shoreline was covered with mesquite trees, dry grass, and thick undergrowth. Apart from the occasional hunter or fisherman, the area was usually silent. Then something caught his attention. Partially hidden beneath the brush was what looked like a collection of bones. At first, he assumed they belonged to an animal. West Texas was full of them. But as he stepped closer, he realized something was terribly wrong. Within minutes, deputies from the Scurry County Sheriff's Office were racing toward the remote shoreline, followed by Texas Rangers, crime scene investigators, and forensic specialists. The area was immediately sealed off. Investigators moved slowly through the brush, carefully marking every fragment before disturbing the scene. No one wanted to make a mistake, because if these remains belonged to who they feared, this investigation was about to change forever. For more than 2 years, an entire Texas community had searched for a missing 13-year-old girl. Volunteers had walked countless miles. Helicopters had searched from the air. Search dogs had combed through fields and abandoned buildings. The FBI had joined the investigation. Thousands of tips had been chased. Yet despite all those efforts, she had never been found, until now. As forensic teams continued their recovery, one question echoed across the scene. How had a child remained hidden for more than 2 years? And an even more unsettling question soon followed. Had investigators already been told where to look? Years earlier, during an interview, one of the people closest to the investigation had unexpectedly mentioned Scurry County. At the time, the comment seemed insignificant. Looking back, some investigators wondered whether it had been one of the most overlooked statements in the entire case. If they had searched here sooner, could the truth have been uncovered years earlier? Or had they been chasing the wrong answers from the very beginning? The discovery would reignite one of Texas' most controversial child homicide investigations. An investigation built on conflicting timelines, changing stories, questionable forensic evidence, and a murder charge that would eventually collapse before a jury ever heard the case. More than 15 years later, people still ask the same questions. What really happened to 13-year-old Hailey Dunn? Did investigators identify the right suspect but fail to prove it? Or does the truth still remain hidden somewhere inside the evidence? To answer those questions, we have to go back to the final ordinary day of Christmas break, December 27, 2010. A quiet Monday in the small town of Colorado City, Texas. A day that began like any other, and ended with a 13-year-old girl vanishing without a trace. Before we begin, if you value respectful, well-researched true crime documentaries, consider subscribing. Now, let's go back to where it all started. Before Hailey Dunn became the center of one of Texas's most debated homicide investigations, she was simply a 12-year-old girl enjoying the final days of Christmas break. She was energetic, outspoken, and rarely sat still for long. Friends remembered someone who loved making people laugh. Teachers described her as friendly and full of personality. Whether she was spending time with classmates or practicing with one of her sports teams, Hailey seemed happiest when she was surrounded by people. She loved cheerleading and played volleyball, basketball, and softball. Competition excited her, but being part of a team mattered even more. Like many girls her age, she spent time texting friends, talking about school, and looking forward to whatever came next. She was just 2 days away from her 13th birthday. For most children, turning 13 is a milestone, a step into the teenage years filled with excitement, new freedoms, and plans for the future. Hailey never got that chance. She lived in Colorado City, Texas, a small West Texas community where many neighbors had known one another for years. It was the kind of town where children rode their bikes through the neighborhood, parents recognized familiar faces wherever they went, and people generally believed serious crime happened somewhere else. Hailey divided her time between her mother, Billie Jean Dunn, and her father, Clint Dunn, who lived just across the street after their divorce. Despite no longer living together, Clint remained a constant presence in his daughter's life. Hailey often walked across the street just to spend time with him. Sometimes she had a reason, sometimes she didn't. Those ordinary visits would later become some of Clint's most treasured memories. Christmas 2010 had come and gone. Like countless families across America, the Dunn family had spent the holiday exchanging gifts, sharing meals, and enjoying a break from school and work. Nothing appeared unusual. There were no reports that Hailey was upset, no indication she planned to run away, no evidence she intended to leave home. She was looking forward to celebrating her birthday in just 2 days. But behind the normal routines, life inside the household wasn't entirely peaceful. Billie Jean's boyfriend, Sean Adkins, had been living with the family. Their relationship had experienced difficulties in the past, and law enforcement had previously responded to domestic disturbance calls involving the couple. Those incidents did not mean a violent crime was about to happen, but they would later become part of the broader picture investigators carefully examined. At the time, however, no one imagined the family was about to become the focus of a nationwide missing child investigation. The day after Christmas is usually uneventful. Children sleep in. Parents return to work. Holiday decorations remain hanging for just a little longer. December 27, 2010, began exactly that way. It was a quiet Monday morning. No one in Colorado City could have known that before the day was over. One 12-year-old girl would disappear, leaving behind an empty bedroom, a timeline filled with unanswered questions, and a mystery that, more than 15 years later, still sparks debate across Texas, because somewhere during that ordinary winter day, Hailey Dunn vanished, and the person responsible has never been held legally accountable. The morning of December 27, 2010, began like countless others in Colorado City. Christmas had ended just 2 days earlier, and the town was still enjoying the quiet that comes between the holidays and the return to school. Most children were sleeping in, making the most of the last days of winter break. Inside the Dunn home, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Hailey was still asleep. Her older brother, David, had spent the previous night with a friend and had already left the house. Billie Jean Dunn was preparing for another 12-hour shift at the local hospital, while her live-in boyfriend, Sean Adkins, said he was leaving for work. Before heading out, Billie Jean quietly looked in on her daughter one last time. Hailey was asleep in her bed. Not wanting to wake her during the school holiday, Billie Jean left the house. It would be the last time she ever saw her daughter alive. According to Sean Adkins, he left for work shortly before dawn and drove to Snyder, Texas, where he worked for a pipeline company. He later told investigators that shortly after arriving, he argued with his supervisor and was fired. Embarrassed and upset, he claimed he drove to his mother's home in Big Spring instead of returning to Colorado City, where he spent part of the day using her computer to apply for unemployment benefits. At first, it sounded like an ordinary explanation, but detectives would later discover that several parts of his story didn't match the evidence. Back at the house, Hailey was believed to be alone. Sometime during the early afternoon, a text message was sent from Billie Jean's cell phone to one of Hailey's friends. The message wasn't alarming. It read like an ordinary conversation between teenagers, but investigators were never able to determine with certainty who actually sent it. Was it Hailey? Or someone else using the phone? That unanswered question would become one of many loose ends in the investigation. Later that afternoon, Sean said he returned home and found Hailey awake. According to his account, she told him she was walking across the street to visit her father, Clint Dunn.
Around, I guess like 3 o'clock I got there, and Hailey was there watching TV in the living room, and I went to me and Billy's bedroom, and she came in there and told me that she was going to her father's house and that she was staying the night with a friend, and then she left.
Before planning to spend time with her friend, Mary Beth. He claimed he watched her leave. If that story were true, someone should have seen her. But no one did. Clint Dunn never saw his daughter that day. Neither did Mary Beth. In fact, no verified witness has ever confirmed seeing Hailey after Billie Jean left for work that morning. That single fact would become one of the biggest mysteries in the entire case. Around 4 p.m., David Dunn returned home. Something immediately struck him as unusual. The house was locked. Family members would later say that wasn't typical during the day. Unable to get in through the door, David climbed through a window. Inside, he found Sean Adkins alone. Years later, David recalled that Sean looked unusually startled, like a deer caught in headlights. When David asked where Hailey was, Sean calmly replied that she'd gone to Clint's house. At the time, David accepted the answer. There was no reason not to. Only later would he learn that Clint had never seen her. When Billie Jean finished work that evening, Sean picked her up. During the drive home, he casually told her that Hailey wasn't at the house. According to Sean, she had gone to Clint's home and would likely be spending time with friends. Initially, Billie Jean wasn't overly concerned. Hailey often visited her father. But once she arrived home, something didn't feel right. Hailey's belongings were still there. Her clothes, her personal items, everything appeared untouched. Nothing suggested she had planned to stay away overnight. Trying to reassure herself, Billie Jean called Clint. His answer immediately changed everything. Hailey had never come over. She then contacted Mary Beth's family. Again, the answer was the same. Hailey wasn't there. Within minutes, the explanation Sean had provided had completely fallen apart. Fear quickly replaced reassurance. The family began searching on their own, driving through neighborhoods, checking places Hailey liked to visit, and calling friends. No one had seen her. As the evening turned into night, it became painfully clear that this wasn't a teenager who had simply stayed out too late. Something was wrong. The following day, Hailey Dunn was officially reported missing. At first, investigators considered the possibility that she had run away, a common starting point in cases involving missing teenagers. But as they learned more, that theory became harder to believe. Hailey hadn't packed clothes. She hadn't taken money. She hadn't contacted friends. She had been excited about her upcoming birthday. Nothing suggested she had planned to disappear. The investigation was no longer about finding a runaway. It had become the search for a missing child. And with every passing hour, the chances of bringing Hailey home safely were growing smaller. December 27, 2010, the day after Christmas. Colorado City was still wrapped in the quiet calm that settles over a town during winter break. Holiday lights remained on porches, children slept late, and most families expected nothing more than another ordinary Monday. Inside the Dunn home, 13-year-old Hailey Dunn was asleep. She had stayed up the night before texting friends and enjoying the last days of vacation. In just 2 days, she would turn 13. Friends later said she seemed excited about her birthday. There were no signs she planned to run away. No arguments, no dramatic goodbyes. Just another normal morning. Around 6:30 a.m., Hailey's mother, Billie Jean Dunn, left for work at the local hospital. Before leaving, she looked into Hailey's bedroom one last time. Her daughter was still asleep, so she let her rest. It would be the last time she ever saw her alive. Unknowingly, Billie Jean also left something behind: her cell phone. It remained inside the house, a detail investigators would later examine over and over again. Earlier that morning, Sean Adkins, Billie Jean's live-in boyfriend, had already left, claiming he was heading to his pipeline job in Snyder. According to Sean, he got into an argument with his supervisor, quit his job, drove to his mother's house in Big Spring, then returned to Colorado City later that afternoon. At first, it sounded believable, but investigators would eventually discover that parts of his timeline didn't match employment records or cell phone data. For now, though, no one knew anything was wrong. Sometime during the afternoon, a text message was sent from Billie Jean's forgotten cell phone to one of Hailey's friends. It wasn't alarming. It looked like an ordinary teenage conversation. But investigators could never determine one crucial fact. Did Hailey send it, or did someone else? That uncertainty would remain one of the many unanswered questions in the case. Later that afternoon, Sean claimed he returned home and found Hailey alive. He said she told him she was walking across the street to visit her father, Clint Dunn, before going to spend time with her friend, Mary Beth. According to Sean, he watched her leave. If that story were true, someone else should have seen her. But no one did. Not Clint. Not Mary Beth. No witness has ever confirmed seeing Hailey after that morning. Around 4 p.m., Hailey's older brother, David, returned home after spending the previous night with a friend. Something immediately caught his attention. The house was locked. That wasn't normal. Unable to get inside, David climbed through a window. Inside, he found Sean Adkins alone. Years later, David described Sean's expression as looking like a deer caught in headlights. Surprised, frozen, as if he hadn't expected anyone to come home. David asked the obvious question: "Where's Hailey?" Sean calmly replied that she had gone to Clint's house. At the time, David believed him. There was no reason not to. Hours later, Billie Jean finished her 12-hour shift. On the drive home, Sean casually told her that Hailey had gone across the street to Clint's house and would probably stay with a friend afterward. Again, nothing sounded alarming. Until Billie Jean walked into Hailey's bedroom. Everything was still there: her backpack, her clothes, her personal belongings. Nothing suggested she had packed for the night. A feeling of unease quickly replaced reassurance. Billie Jean called Clint. His answer was immediate. Hailey had never come over. She then called Mary Beth's family. Hailey wasn't there either. In just a few minutes, the story Sean had told both David and Billie Jean had completely fallen apart. Panic spread through the family. They began searching on their own, driving through neighborhoods, checking parks, calling friends, and knocking on doors. No one had seen Hailey. The following day, she was officially reported missing. At first, investigators considered the possibility that she had run away, a common starting point in many cases involving missing teenagers. But Hailey had taken almost nothing with her. She hadn't contacted friends. She had left behind the things a 13-year-old would normally pack if she intended to stay away. As those facts became clear, the investigation shifted. This was no longer treated as a runaway case. It became the search for a missing child. Within days, local volunteers, the Texas Rangers, the FBI, search dogs, and helicopters flooded Colorado City. Fields were searched. Creeks were checked. Abandoned buildings were cleared. Hundreds of people walked mile after mile, hoping to find any sign of Hailey. But with every passing day, the mystery only grew deeper. Someone knew what happened during those missing hours. The question was, would investigators uncover the truth before the trail went cold? By the second day, Colorado City knew this wasn't an ordinary missing person case. A 13-year-old girl had vanished without a trace. There had been no confirmed sightings. No phone calls, no messages asking for help, no evidence that Hailey had left willingly. The small Texas town responded the only way it knew how. Everyone searched. Teachers postponed their holiday plans. Church members organized volunteer teams. Neighbors grabbed flashlights, ATVs, and pickup trucks. Parents walked fields alongside complete strangers. Within days, hundreds of volunteers spread across ranchland, dry creek beds, abandoned buildings, oil lease roads, and miles of rugged West Texas terrain. The FBI joined the investigation. So did the Texas Rangers. Search dogs followed every possible scent. Helicopters scanned from above. Flyers bearing Hailey's smiling face appeared in store windows, gas stations, churches, and schools across the region. For a town of fewer than 4,000 people, it felt like everyone was looking for the same little girl. And no one searched harder than her father. Every morning, Clint Dunn went back out. He searched empty fields, walked lonely dirt roads, checked abandoned structures, followed every tip, no matter how unlikely. Friends later said he refused to believe Hailey had simply disappeared. He believed she was still out there, waiting to be found. As the days passed, investigators continued reconstructing Hailey's final known hours. Again and again, their attention returned to the same person, Sean Adkins. He had been one of the last people who claimed to see Hailey alive, and the more detectives examined his timeline, the more questions they had. Sean originally told investigators he had been fired from his pipeline job after an argument with his supervisor. But when detectives contacted his employer, they heard a different story. There had been no argument. According to company officials, Sean had voluntarily quit. When confronted, Sean admitted he had lied. He later claimed he didn't want Billie Jean to know he had quit his job because she would be angry. For investigators, that admission mattered. If he had lied about something so easy to verify, could he be lying about something much more important? Detectives then examined his cell phone records. The digital timeline raised additional concerns. The records did not perfectly match the movements Sean had described during his interviews. While the data didn't prove he had committed a crime, investigators believed it created significant inconsistencies in his account of the day Hailey disappeared. Those inconsistencies kept bringing detectives back to the same question. Did Hailey ever leave the house alive? Another detail also stayed with investigators. During questioning, Sean claimed he watched Hailey walk away toward her father's home. But neither Clint Dunn nor Hailey's friend Mary Beth ever saw her that day. If Sean's account was accurate, where had she gone? As the investigation intensified, public attention turned toward the Dunn household. Television crews arrived in Colorado City. National news outlets covered the case almost daily. The entire country was now watching. Then came a moment that many residents never forgot. Only 4 days after Hailey disappeared, Billie Jean Dunn and Sean Adkins hosted a New Year's Eve gathering at their home. There was music, food, guests, laughter. Across the street, Clint Dunn continued searching for his missing daughter. The gathering immediately became a source of public criticism. To be clear, holding a party is not evidence that someone committed a crime. People respond to stress and uncertainty in very different ways. Investigators have never suggested the gathering itself proved guilt, but perception can shape public opinion. And in Colorado City, many people struggled to understand how any celebration could take place while a 13-year-old girl was still missing. The case was becoming more complicated by the day. Searches continued. Tips poured in. Investigators followed hundreds of leads across Texas. Each one ended the same way. Nothing. No confirmed sightings. No physical evidence revealing where Hailey had gone. No breakthrough. Weeks turned into months. The search parties grew smaller. Media attention slowly faded. But detectives refused to close the file. Behind the scenes, they continued reviewing interviews, checking alibis, and comparing witness statements. One timeline, one contradiction, one overlooked detail could still reveal the truth. What no one realized was that the answer had been hidden for years, in a remote corner of West Texas where almost nobody thought to look. And when that place finally gave up its secret, it would transform the investigation forever. As months turned into years, the hope that Hailey Dunn would be found alive slowly began to fade. Search teams eventually packed up. The television cameras moved on. Life in Colorado City continued. But for Hailey's family, time stood still. Every birthday came without a celebration. Every Christmas brought painful reminders of the holiday season that ended with her disappearance. Her bedroom remained much as she had left it, a silent reminder of a life interrupted. Her father, Clint Dunn, refused to give up. He continued speaking with investigators, giving interviews, and asking the public not to forget his daughter. He believed someone, somewhere, knew the truth. Then, more than 2 years after Hailey vanished, everything changed. On March 16, 2013, a man hiking near Lake J.B. in neighboring Scurry County noticed something unusual beneath thick brush near the shoreline. At first glance, he assumed he had found animal bones. But as he stepped closer, he realized they were human. He immediately called authorities. Within minutes, deputies, Texas Rangers, crime scene investigators, and forensic specialists arrived at the remote location. The area was sealed off. Every inch of the scene was photographed before anything was touched. Investigators carefully marked each bone, recorded its location, and searched the surrounding area for anything that might explain how the remains had ended up there. The recovery took hours. Because once a scene like this is disturbed, it can never be recreated. No one at the site could immediately identify the remains. More than 2 years of exposure to harsh weather, wildlife, and the Texas landscape had left investigators with very little to work with. The remains were transported to the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office. Forensic anthropologists began the difficult process of determining who the victim was. Dental records were examined. Missing person files were reviewed. Finally, DNA testing provided the answer. The remains belonged to 13-year-old Hailey Dunn. After more than 26 months, the search was over. The announcement devastated Colorado City. For years, many people had feared this outcome. Now, that fear had become reality. Teachers remembered the energetic student who brightened classrooms. Friends remembered the cheerleader who loved making people laugh. Coaches remembered an athlete who threw herself into every game. For her father, the confirmation brought mixed emotions. The uncertainty was finally over. But the answer he received was the one no parent ever wants to hear. His daughter wasn't coming home. Investigators now focused on the next critical question. How had Hailey died? Unfortunately, time had taken many of the answers with it. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. The remains showed evidence consistent with blunt force trauma. But because of their condition, investigators could not determine exactly when she had been killed, where the fatal injuries occurred, or precisely how her body had been moved to the remote recovery site. Those missing answers would become major obstacles in the years ahead. Then detectives remembered something that immediately caught their attention. Years earlier, during questioning, Sean Adkins had been asked where he believed investigators might eventually find Hailey. His answer had been Scurry County. Now, that was exactly where her remains had been discovered. The coincidence drew renewed scrutiny. Investigators documented it carefully. But they also understood something important. Suspicion is not proof. A disturbing statement, even one that later appears significant, is not enough to convict someone of murder. They still needed evidence linking a suspect directly to Hailey's death, and that evidence remained frustratingly out of reach. Many people assumed an arrest would quickly follow now that Hailey had been found, but experienced investigators knew better. Finding a victim answers one question. Proving who killed them is often far more difficult. There were still no eyewitnesses, no confession, no murder weapon, no forensic evidence placing a suspect at the recovery site. The case remained largely circumstantial, strong enough to keep investigators focused, but not yet strong enough to guarantee a conviction. To the public, the investigation seemed to slow once again. But behind closed doors, detectives never stopped working. They continued reviewing witness statements, re-examining physical evidence, following new tips, looking for the one piece that could transform years of suspicion into proof. It would take nearly another decade, a fresh review by cold case investigators and advances in forensic science, before prosecutors finally believed they had enough evidence to bring a murder charge against the man they had long suspected. For years, Hailey Dunn's case seemed trapped in place. The evidence boxes remained on police shelves. Investigators continued receiving tips. Most led nowhere. Some repeated rumors that had already been investigated, but a handful encouraged detectives to take another look at evidence collected years earlier. The case was assigned for a fresh review. This time, investigators weren't racing against the clock. They had something they hadn't had in 2010. Hindsight, every interview was read again. Every timeline was rebuilt. Witness statements were compared line by line. Old evidence was re-examined using newer forensic techniques that hadn't been available during the original investigation. Among the items revisited was a pair of Sean Adkins' work boots. Investigators had collected them years earlier, but at the time, testing had revealed nothing conclusive. Now, forensic scientists believed microscopic soil trapped inside the boots might reveal more. Using a specialized analytical technique, they compared soil particles from the boots with soil collected from the area near Lake J.B. Where Hailey's remains had been found. The preliminary results caught investigators' attention. According to the analysis, the samples appeared highly similar. For detectives, it was potentially the strongest physical evidence they had ever obtained. It didn't stand alone. They viewed it alongside everything else. The conflicting timelines, the false statements about Sean's job, the cell phone records, the claim that Hailey walked to her father's house, even though no one ever saw her, and his earlier remark that Hailey would likely be found in Scurry County. Individually, none of those facts proved murder. Together, investigators believed they painted a compelling picture. After reviewing the evidence, a grand jury agreed there was enough to move forward. On June 13, 2021, more than 10 years after Hailey disappeared, Texas Rangers arrested Sean Adkins and charged him with murder. The news spread across Texas within hours. For many people, it felt like the ending they had waited more than a decade to see. At last, someone was being held accountable. For Clint Dunn, the arrest was deeply emotional. He had spent years refusing to let his daughter's case fade into the background. Now he believed justice had finally begun. He thanked investigators for refusing to give up. He thanked the volunteers who had searched, and he thanked everyone who had kept Hailey's name alive over the years. Across Colorado City, many residents felt a sense of relief. Some embraced. Others cried. Many admitted they had wondered if this day would ever come. Still, an arrest is not a conviction. Experienced prosecutors understood that public opinion would not decide the case. A jury would. Every piece of evidence would be challenged. Every witness would be cross-examined. Every inconsistency would be exposed. The defense immediately made its position clear. Sean Adkins pleaded not guilty. He continued denying any involvement in Hailey's death. His attorneys argued that suspicion, even years of suspicion, was not enough to prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt. They promised to challenge every major piece of the state's case. As both sides prepared for trial, one piece of evidence stood above all the rest: the soil analysis. Prosecutors believed it could physically connect Sean to the remote location where Hailey's remains had been found. If the science held up, it could become the cornerstone of their case. If it didn't, everything else would become much harder to prove. The stakes couldn't have been higher, because despite years of investigation, there was still no eyewitness, no confession, no murder weapon, no DNA directly linking Sean to Hailey's death. The prosecution's case depended on many separate pieces fitting together into one convincing picture. Meanwhile, Sean remained behind bars awaiting trial. For Hailey's family, every court hearing carried renewed hope. They had waited more than a decade for this moment. Now they wanted answers. What exactly had happened on December 27, 2010? Would the evidence finally reveal the truth? Or would those missing hours remain a mystery forever? As the trial date approached, neither side realized that the biggest battle wouldn't be fought over witness testimony. It would be fought over science. And that scientific debate would soon change the entire course of the case. For more than a decade, everything had been building toward one moment: a courtroom, a jury, a chance for Hailey Dunn's family to finally hear the evidence laid out from beginning to end. Many believed the hardest part was over. The suspect had been arrested. The investigation was complete. Justice seemed closer than ever. But criminal cases are not won because investigators believe they have the right suspect. They are won only when the evidence can survive relentless scrutiny. And as both sides prepared for trial, the foundation of the state's case began to shift. At the center of that foundation was the soil evidence. Prosecutors believed microscopic soil particles recovered from Sean Adkins' work boots connected him to the remote area near Lake J.B. where Hailey's remains had been discovered. It was the closest thing they had to physical evidence linking him to the recovery site. Combined with his inconsistent timeline, his false statements, his cell phone records, and years of suspicious circumstances, the soil comparison appeared to complete the puzzle. It had helped convince a grand jury to indict him. But before trial, the defense challenged the science behind that conclusion. Independent experts reviewed the testing. Then the FBI conducted its own evaluation. Their findings dramatically changed the landscape of the case. According to the Federal Review, the soil analysis could not reliably establish that the particles found in Sean's boots came from the location where Hailey's remains were recovered. The FBI also questioned whether the testing method had been sufficiently validated for use as definitive forensic evidence in a murder prosecution. In other words, the prosecution's strongest scientific evidence was no longer considered reliable enough to stand on its own. The impact was immediate. Without that evidence, the case looked very different. Investigators still had numerous concerns. Sean had changed parts of his story. His explanation about leaving work had been false. His timeline raised questions. His account of Hailey walking to her father's house was never supported by a single witness. And years earlier, he had mentioned Scurry County before Hailey's remains were eventually found there. Those facts remained part of the investigation. But none of them directly proved murder. There was still no eyewitness. No confession, no murder weapon, no DNA placing Sean with Hailey at the time of her death, and no forensic evidence identifying where she had actually been killed. The passage of time had only made those gaps larger. By the time Hailey's remains were discovered in 2013, more than 2 years had passed. Weather, wildlife, natural decomposition, all had destroyed evidence investigators desperately wished they had. Some questions could never be answered. Where had the murder occurred? How had her body been transported? Could biological evidence have existed in those first days after she disappeared? No one could know. Those opportunities were gone forever. Faced with those realities, prosecutors had to ask themselves a difficult question. Could they honestly prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? The answer carried enormous consequences. In the American justice system, prosecutors have an ethical duty to pursue a case only if they believe the evidence is sufficient to support a lawful conviction. Public opinion isn't enough. Suspicion isn't enough. Even years of investigative work aren't enough. The evidence must meet the legal standard. As trial approached, both sides entered plea negotiations. According to court records, prosecutors offered Sean Adkins a plea agreement that would have resulted in a lengthy prison sentence. He refused. He maintained his innocence and chose to prepare for trial instead. Then came June 26, 2023. Instead of selecting a jury, the Nolan County District Attorney filed a motion asking the court to dismiss the murder charge. The decision stunned Hailey's family. It shocked many of the investigators who had spent years working the case, and it left the community struggling to understand how a case that had once seemed so strong had unraveled. The state explained that after reviewing all of the available evidence, including the FBI's assessment, it no longer believed it could prove the charge beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge granted the motion. The murder charge was dismissed. But there was one important detail. The dismissal was without prejudice. Legally, that meant Sean Adkins had not been acquitted. He had not been found innocent. Instead, prosecutors retained the ability to file murder charges again if significant new evidence is discovered in the future. After spending nearly 2 years in jail awaiting trial, Sean walked free. No jury ever heard the evidence, no witnesses testified, no verdict was reached. For Hailey's family, it felt like justice had slipped away a second time. After 13 years of waiting, they were left exactly where they had started, still searching for answers, and still hoping that one day, someone will finally reveal what happened during those missing hours on December 27, 2010. Some cases end with a verdict. A jury reaches a decision. A sentence is handed down. Families leave the courtroom carrying grief, but also a sense that the justice system has finally done its part. Hailey Dunn's case never reached that moment. There was no trial, no testimony explaining what happened during her final hours, no witness who stood in court and revealed the truth. Only a 13-year-old girl whose life ended far too soon, and a family still searching for answers. Today, more than 15 years after Hailey disappeared, her homicide investigation remains open. The murder charge against Sean Adkins was dismissed without prejudice, meaning prosecutors can file charges again if significant new evidence emerges. For investigators, the case has never been closed. They continue encouraging anyone with credible information to come forward, no matter how small it may seem, because history has shown that even decades-old cases can be solved. A forgotten witness may finally speak. New forensic techniques may uncover evidence once thought impossible to recover. Or someone who has carried a secret for years may eventually decide they can no longer remain silent. Until that day comes, the truth remains incomplete. Hailey's story also highlights how critical the first hours of a missing child investigation can be. When a child disappears, every passing minute matters. Memories begin to fade. Digital evidence can disappear. Potential witnesses move away. Weather changes a crime scene. Time quietly erases opportunities that investigators can never recover. This case also reminds us of another difficult reality. Suspicion and proof are not the same. Investigators may strongly believe they know what happened. Families may believe they know who is responsible. Communities may reach their own conclusions. But inside a courtroom, only evidence can determine guilt. That standard exists to protect everyone. It is one of the foundations of the justice system. And while it can lead to heartbreaking outcomes for victims' families, it is a principle that cannot be ignored. But beyond the investigation, beyond the court filings, beyond the headlines, there is someone we should remember most: Hailey Dunn. She wasn't just a missing person poster. She wasn't simply the victim in a nationally known investigation. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a teammate. She loved cheerleading. She enjoyed volleyball, basketball, and softball. She laughed loudly. She stood up for her friends. She was excited about her birthday, which was only 2 days away. She had plans for high school, dreams she never had the chance to chase, a future that was stolen before it truly began. It's easy for true crime stories to become focused on suspects and investigations, but those should never overshadow the life at the center of the case. The goal of telling Hailey's story isn't to sensationalize tragedy. It's to ensure she is remembered as the young girl she was, not simply for the way her life ended. In Colorado City, life eventually returned to normal. Children still ride bicycles through quiet neighborhoods. Friday night football games still bring families together. Businesses open each morning. People go about their daily lives. But for those who loved Hailey, December 27, 2010, never truly ended. Every Christmas carries painful memories. Every December 29 marks the birthday she never celebrated. Every anniversary of her disappearance reminds her family that one question still has no answer. What really happened during those missing hours? Perhaps one day, someone will provide that answer. Perhaps advances in forensic science will uncover evidence that no one could recover in 2010. Or perhaps the person who knows the truth will finally decide to tell it. Until then, Hailey Dunn's name remains on the list of unsolved homicide victims whose families continue waiting, not for revenge, but for certainty. If this case has taught us anything, it's that every missing child deserves immediate attention, every lead deserves to be carefully examined, and every victim deserves to be remembered long after the headlines disappear. Because justice is not measured only by convictions. It is also measured by a society's refusal to forget. If you've stayed with us until the end, thank you for taking the time to remember Hailey Dunn with us. Every respectful conversation helps keep her story alive and honors the life behind the case. If you appreciate carefully researched true crime documentaries built on verified investigations and court records, consider subscribing for more stories that deserve to be remembered. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of the people you love, and never forget the names behind the headlines. Hailey Dunn, gone far too soon, never forgotten.